The Janssen family fits most strongly into the category of entrepreneurial legacies. Their influence was built through pharmaceutical science, disciplined research, and the ability to transform drug discovery into a global medical business. At the center of the dynasty was Paul Janssen, the Belgian physician, pharmacologist, and entrepreneur who transformed a small family-connected pharmaceutical operation into one of the most influential research organizations in modern medicine. The family story is ultimately about how scientific expertise, operational discipline, and strategic business decisions allowed a Belgian family to shape psychiatry, anesthesia, infectious disease treatment, and pharmaceutical research infrastructure across the world. The foundations of the family empire began with Constant Janssen, Paul's father, who operated a pharmaceutical business in Belgium. This gave Paul early exposure to both medicine and commerce, doctors, medicines, suppliers, distributors, and the mechanics of pharmaceutical sales. That combination mattered enormously. Many scientists understand chemistry, but not commercialization. Many businessmen understand distribution, but not research. Paul Janssen developed both perspectives simultaneously. Paul Janssen was deeply science-oriented from an early age. After military service, he worked at the Institute of Pharmacology at the University of Cologne and later at Ghent University under Nobel Prize-winning pharmacologist Corneille Heymans. Those experiences placed him inside advanced European pharmacology networks during the explosive post-war expansion of modern medicine. The transition from scientific training to entrepreneurship happened in 1953. Using a loan of 50,000 Belgian francs from his father, Paul Janssen founded a small research laboratory. The initial capital was modest, but the structure of the investment was important. The family's first major transfer of wealth into the next generation was directed toward research capability and intellectual property creation rather than passive ownership or real estate. Paul Janssen's style combined scientific obsession with strong business instincts. He was not simply inventing molecules in isolation. He understood that speed, patents, manufacturing, regulatory approval, and physician adoption all mattered commercially. He built teams aggressively, encouraged rapid experimentation, and reinvested heavily into research. Janssen Pharmaceutica developed a reputation for unusually productive medicinal chemistry operations, where scientists systematically explored families of compounds rather than relying on isolated discoveries. The pace of innovation was extraordinary. In 1953, Janssen discovered ambucetamide, a treatment for menstrual pain. By 1958, he developed haloperidol, a breakthrough antipsychotic drug that transformed schizophrenia treatment worldwide. Soon afterward, Janssen and his teams developed fentanyl, droperidol, etomidate, and other anesthetic and opioid compounds that became central to modern surgical medicine. From a business perspective, these discoveries created something much larger than a laboratory. They created intellectual property, licensing power, physician relationships, and recurring pharmaceutical demand. Janssen Pharmaceutica expanded rapidly because successful drugs produced both enormous medical impact and durable commercial economics. Unlike commodity manufacturers, the company operated in high-margin patented pharmaceuticals where breakthrough discoveries could scale globally. Paul Janssen also appeared unusually comfortable balancing scientific rigor with commercial pragmatism. He understood that pharmaceutical research was expensive, uncertain, and increasingly global. That likely influenced one of the most important decisions in the family's history: selling Janssen Pharmaceutica to Johnson & Johnson in 1961. At the time of the acquisition, Janssen Pharmaceutica reportedly employed around 400 people and was already becoming internationally significant. Many founders resist acquisition because they fear losing control or identity. Janssen instead appears to have viewed Johnson & Johnson as infrastructure: global manufacturing, regulatory expertise, distribution, financing, and scale. Importantly, the acquisition still allowed him broad scientific autonomy. Rather than spending decades building every commercial layer independently, Paul integrated his research organization into one of the world's largest healthcare companies while continuing to lead scientific development. That decision shaped the dynasty's long-term structure. The Janssen family did not remain controlling industrial owners across generations. Instead, they monetized ownership relatively early while preserving scientific influence and long-term financial wealth. In many ways, The family evolved from pharmaceutical operators into scientific aristocracy embedded within a larger healthcare empire. Even after the acquisition, Paul Janssen remained intensely active. He continued pushing research productivity, global expansion, and computational drug discovery. In 1985, Janssen Pharmaceutica became the first Western pharmaceutical company to establish a factory in China, reflecting how early the organization recognized the globalization of medicine and manufacturing. In 1995, Paul Janssen and Paul Louis established the Center for Molecular Design, which used supercomputers to search for candidate molecules for AIDS treatments years before computational drug discovery became common practice. The family's culture appears to have emphasized intellectual rigor, scientific achievement, and relatively low public visibility. Unlike many wealthy dynasties, the Janssens did not become associated with celebrity culture or highly public displays of wealth. Their influence came through scientific institutions, pharmaceutical infrastructure, and medicine itself. In 1991, King Baudouin elevated Paul Janssen into the Belgian nobility with the title of Baron, reflecting how deeply the family had become connected to Belgian's scientific and industrial identity. At the same time, the family's legacy became increasingly complex. Fentanyl alone guaranteed that the Janssen name would occupy a controversial place in pharmaceutical history. When Paul Janssen synthesized Fentanyl in 1959, it represented a major advancement in anesthesia and pain management. Decades later, however, Fentanyl became deeply associated with the opioid crisis and illicit narcotics markets. The connection is historically complicated because the original invention emerged in a very different medical and regulatory environment, but the association nonetheless became part of the family's broader legacy. Information about Paul Janssen's children and later generations is relatively limited publicly, which itself reflects the family culture. Paul and his wife Dora Arts Janssen had 5 children and 13 grandchildren, but the later generations did not become visible operating heirs in the way some family business dynasties structure succession. After the Johnson & Johnson acquisition, the family's role shifted away from direct corporate control. Paul remained the symbolic and scientific center of the organization, while the next generations maintained comparatively private lives. Paul Janssen's personal fortune is also less publicly documented than many modern pharmaceutical billionaires. There is no reliable public net worth figure for him, even though he was clearly wealthy and highly influential. The clearest signs of family wealth appear through philanthropy, institutional prestige, and cultural collecting. Dora Janssen assembled a major pre-Columbian art collection, later valued at approximately 25 million euros, which became part of an inheritance tax dispute after Paul's death. That detail is revealing, because it suggests the family accumulated significant cultural wealth while maintaining a relatively restrained public profile. Over time, the Janssen dynasty became less about direct ownership and more about institutional legacy. The family no longer controls a standalone pharmaceutical empire, but the Janssen name remains deeply embedded inside Johnson & Johnson's pharmaceutical operations and modern medical history itself. Paul Janssen is deeply revered and considered a national hero of Belgium. He finished runner-up in a 2005 poll for the greatest Belgian. In 2008, he was awarded the title of Most Important Belgian Scientist. The journal Nature reviews drug discovery in their 2004 obituary and tribute to Dr. Paul Janssen described him as one of the most successful drug hunters of all time and arguably the most prolific drug discoverer of the latter half of the 20th century. Ultimately, the family's long-term success came from a combination of scientific credibility, aggressive reinvestment into research, willingness to scale globally, and unusually pragmatic business decisions. Paul Janssen understood that great pharmaceutical discoveries required more than chemistry alone. They required teams, systems, manufacturing, patents, physician trust, and international infrastructure. By combining scientific creativity with operational discipline, Paul Janssen built one of the most influential pharmaceutical legacies of the modern era.